guys, welcome back to the video. Today we're going to be discussing free float. It's a concept that comes up briefly in the level 1 corporate issuers module. It's pretty straightforward, but we'll run through the definition and a quick example. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so the definition of free float, let's start there. So free float is the number of shares in a public company that are freely traded amongst the investing public. It's the shares that are not held by long-term strategic investors or company management, i.e. insiders. So yeah, it's the shares that are being traded amongst the public market, and it excludes all shares that are basically held and are never going to be traded. Shares that are held by the CEO, the founder, and sort of long-term private equity, venture capital, institutional investors who are not looking to actively trade in the next 6 to 12 months or even longer. It's the shares that public market investors who are looking to buy in, it's the shares that are available for them to trade in. And we'll run through a few examples of actual sort of real life companies like Tesla and Amundi to kind of make it crystal clear what their float looks like relative to their sort of total shareholding. So one way we could think about free float is how we would calculate it mathematically. So we could define it as total number of company shares. So the total number of shares the company has in issue, less the number of shares held by insiders or long-term investors that are not for sale. So that's how I like to think about it. That's how I always used to think about it when I was sort of studying towards the exam. It's effectively, you're just deducting the number of shares that are not for sale from the total number of shares the company has in issue. So the shares that are held by the CEO, the CFO, the executive level management, founders, and then the sort of external parties that are holding the shares for the long term. So that's typically private equity firms, venture capital firms, asset managers who are holding the shares for strategic reasons. That's basically how I would think about it. Number of shares available to the public to trade, and often expressed as a percentage of total shares outstanding. So you may say if a company's got 1,000 shares in issuance, 200 of those shares are owned amongst the CEO, the CFO, and sort of the founding group, and 800 shares are available to the public, then the float or the free float would be 80%. So that's how you can think about it. 800 divided by 1,000 shares. Typically you'd see it expressed as a percentage of the total shares outstanding. So shareholding structures do differ from company to company. Some companies have a highly dispersed shareholder base, so a large proportion of their shares are traded amongst the public, and they have a high free float, and so they don't have many long-term institutional holders. Founders only have a small percentage. So yeah, that's kind of a dispersed shareholding structure, and that would typically come with a high free float. And then on the other end, you could have concentrated ownership structures. That's where you find a large proportion of shares held by one founder or a handful of founders and maybe one or two institutional shareholders, and not as high a proportion of the shares available for the public to trade in. So that would be defined as a concentrated ownership structure, and you'd see a low free float as a result. So yeah, different companies have different proportions of shares that are available to trade amongst the public. So yeah, two good examples here. You've got Tesla. So Tesla, at the time of me filming this video, their shareholder base is made up of 87% free float. So my terrible pie chart, 87% free float. 87% of the shares trade on the public market, and then the remaining 13% of the shares are held by company insiders, most of which is held by Elon Musk. What we're trying to say here is basically Elon doesn't and probably will not trade in his shares anytime soon. They're being held for the long term and not available to the public to buy. So we would not consider those shares part of the free float. The float is only what is available for the public to trade in right now. And then you've got Amundi. So Amundi's shareholder base is slightly more complicated. It's a asset manager, which is listed on the Euronext. It's the largest European asset manager. 69% of its shares are held by Crédit Agricole, so the banking group. So they're privately held shares. A very small percent, 2% held by employees. And then the remaining 29% is available for the public to trade in. So that's the free float. Two different companies, two different levels of free float. You got Tesla, where there's quite a large proportion of the shareholder base is owned by the investing public, and Amundi, who's got a significantly smaller amount of free float. So you got 87% for Tesla, 29% for Amundi. Different companies have different levels of free float. So yeah, that's free float. That's all I wanted to discuss in this video. Any questions, feel free to fire them off in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.